Y'all ain't gonna believe this. Washington just dropped billions into ammo, and guess what? Half of it's gonna end up sitting on the same shelves you and I buy from, which means we're finally talking cheaper bullets instead of empty shelves. What's up, everyone? This is Ted from Line 45, and today, we're digging into how a government bill meant for the military might have just kick-started one of the biggest civilian ammo surpluses we've seen in years. Before we dive in, do me a solid. Smash that subscribe, tap the bell, hit all the dang buttons down there. You don't gotta, but it keeps this train rolling and lets me crank out more of this wild gun talk for y'all. Alright, enough of that. Let's get back to it. Hidden ammo clause in H.R. 1. Alright boys, buckle up because this one's wild. Washington just passed H.R. 1 back in July 2025. Yeah, that giant, bloated bill everybody was half asleep on, and hidden in the fine print, they basically lit the fuse on an ammo boom. They tossed billions into the Defense Production Act, the same emergency hammer they used to crank out tanks and missiles, but this time it's pointed at bullets and brass. You can't make this up. Now here's where it gets juicy. The Lake City Army ammunition plant out in Independence, Missouri. That place is a beast. It was built to pump out over 1.6 billion rounds a year. But here's the part the politicians won't brag about. Historically, when the military doesn't need every single round, the extras slide right out the back door into the civilian market. Winchester and Federal slap their labels on it, and boom, you're buying it at Cabela's. Bloomberg even dug into it and found the DoD rakes in like $30 million a year just from those civilian sales. Uncle Sam's been double-dipping, and most folks don't even realize it. So what happens when Congress throws billions into ramping up production? Easy math. More bullets rolling off those machines than the Army can ever burn through. And when there's extra, guess who gets it? Me and you. Instead of empty shelves and panic prices, we're talking stacks of 5.56 and 7.62 at the local shop. So, where does this lead us? $100 million earmarked for small or medium arms ammo. So here's where the rubber meets the road, boys. Buried in that bill is a clean $100 million carved out just for small and medium caliber ammo. We're talking the bread and butter rounds. 5.56 NATO and 7.62 NATO. If you own an AR-15, a SCAR, a Mon Ampere, or heck, even a hunting rifle chambered in .308, this is your lane. Washington didn't mean to throw us a bone, but by supercharging production on those calibers, they lit up the same pipeline that dumps surplus into our hands. The hub of all this is still Lake City Army ammunition plant out in Missouri. That plant can crank over 1.4 to 1.6 billion rounds a year, and history shows about half of that can bleed into the civilian market once Uncle Sam's got his fill. And who handles it? Federal and Winchester, companies that slap their branding on military overruns and sell them straight to us. That's why sometimes the stuff you buy at Bass Pro looks suspiciously like the rounds issued downrange, because it literally comes from the same line. To be fair, the ammo crunch of 2020 to 2021 wasn't just about panic buying, it was about supply not keeping up. Shelves were bare, and a case of 5.56 that should have been a couple of $100 shot up into the stratosphere. With this extra $100 million, Lake City and its contractors can hammer out more 5.56 and 7.62 than the Pentagon will chew through, which means the spillover is us buying cheaper range ammo without sweating shortages. $2 billion for bullet materials and components. Alright, now here's the part that separates the weekend plinkers from the folks who lived through the dark days of 2020. Remember when shelves were bone dry, and a single brick of primers was rarer than hen's teeth? That shortage wasn't just people hoarding, it was a full-on supply chain collapse for the guts that actually make ammo work. Primers, brass, powder, copper, and lead. You can have all the fancy assembly lines you want, but if you ain't got primers, you ain't making a single round. Well, Washington just threw $2 billion at that exact problem. They're locking down the raw stuff, copper for jackets, lead for cores, brass for cases, and the chemical mixes that make primers pop. And it ain't charity either. These are strategic materials the Pentagon needs for national defense. But yeah, when Uncle Sam secures bulk contracts, stabilizes mining, and pumps money into refining, the civilian side of the market benefits right along with it. Less volatility means more consistency, and that means fewer out-of-stock signs at your local shop. Think back to those panic days when 9mm was pushing $1 around and folks were lining up outside Cabela's at sunrise. A huge reason was primers being imported in short supply from overseas. With billions now locked in to stabilize those choke points, the odds of that nightmare repeating drop way down. But that ain't the only money we're talking about here. $1 billion for next-generation ammo factories. Now this is the part that's got me grinning ear to ear, because we ain't just talking more ammo, we're talking about smarter ammo factories. Washington dropped a fat $1 billion into building and upgrading what they call next-generation production lines. That means automation, robotics, and quality control tech that runs circles around the old Cold War-era setups. Translation: faster production, tighter tolerances, and way more rounds hitting the end of the conveyor belt. Let me paint the picture. Places like Lake City Army Ammunition Plant have been grinding for decades, and while they can push out over 1.6 billion rounds a year, a lot of that is with equipment that looks like it came out of your granddad's toolbox. With this money, they're swapping in state-of-the-art robotics that don't call in sick, don't get tired, and don't crank out as many bad rounds. Every cycle of efficiency means more usable ammo, and more ammo means more spillover for the civilian shelves. And don't think this is locked to just 5.5, 6, or 7.62 either. Once those lines are humming, excess output has historically bled into 9mm, 2.23, and even hunting calibers, since Federal and Winchester are the ones moving product into the commercial market. More capacity plus fewer breakdowns equals better prices when it finally hits your local gun store. But that's not all. Workforce expansion and training. You can pour $1 billion into robots and machines, but somebody's still got to keep the lights on and the lines running. That's why Washington tucked in $10 million just for hiring and training new workers across the ammo industry. Think about what that means. More engineers fine-tuning the presses, more inspectors catching duds before they ever hit a box, and more blue-collar folks on the floor keeping production steady day and night. Take the Lake City Army Ammunition Plant out in Missouri. That place is a small city on its own, thousands of workers moving brass, loading powder, cranking out everything from 5.56 NATO to 7.62. When Lake City ramps up, it doesn't just help the Pentagon. History shows the overflow ends up in civilian channels through Winchester and Federal. And when you add more skilled labor into the mix, you're not just boosting volume, you're making sure that volume stays consistent even when demand spikes. Everybody remembers the shortages back in 2020 to 2021. Factories weren't just short on materials. They were short on people who could push production into overdrive. This new funding is meant to close that gap. More workers plus more automation equals fewer slowdowns and more ammo flowing out the door. And obviously all these things work for us. The civilian perks. Here's the payoff, boys. This is where all those line items start hitting your wallet. When Lake City and other plants ramp up production, the Army only takes what it needs. Everything past that gets sold off through contractors like Winchester and Federal, and that's why you've seen XM855 or M80 ball on civilian shelves for years. The pipeline's already in place. These new billions just crank the flow wider. Now let's talk numbers. Right now, in 2025, bulk 5.56 NATO is running somewhere around 36 to 40 cents a round if you buy by the case. That's a far cry from the bad days of 2021 when it spiked close to $1 a round during the panic. With extra production funded, plus stabilized supplies of primers, copper, and powder, the cost pressure finally leans in our favor. More supply chasing the same demand means price drops, plain and simple. And it's not just about cheaper ammo, it's about confidence. Every shooter remembers walking into Cabela's or Academy during the shortage and seeing empty shelves. That's what triggers the panic buying cycle. By keeping materials steady and lines fully staffed, you cut off that chain reaction before it starts. So instead of hoarding cases in your garage and driving prices higher, the market stays balanced. More ammo, fewer shortages, and prices that don't make you choke at the register. The bottom line. Here's the crazy twist to wrap this all up. Washington thought they were writing a bill to keep the Army's trigger finger happy. But what they actually did was bankroll the biggest civilian ammo boost we've seen in years. They dumped billions into brass, powder, factories, and manpower. And guess what? The Pentagon can't chew through it all. And when Uncle Sam's belly is full, the overflow doesn't vanish. It rolls straight into green Winchester boxes and shiny Federal cases, stacked high at the same sporting goods stores you and I raid on payday. That means more 5.56, 7.62, and even 9mm flooding the shelves. And instead of you shelling out $1 a round like we all did back in the dark days of 2021, prices start leveling out where they should have been all along. We're talking steady supply, no panic buying, no hoarding frenzy. It's basically Washington footing the bill to make sure we don't run dry again, without even meaning to. Now, don't get it twisted. If a war pops off tomorrow, Uncle Sam will swallow that surplus before it ever touches a civilian truck. But right here, right now, this setup looks a whole lot like the government just gave America's shooters an unplanned subsidy. They didn't do it for us, but we'll sure as hell take it.